Hello everybody and welcome back to the Software Architecture Vlog series where we speak about all things software architecture. I'm your host Tengiz. I'm a software architect with experience in application, solution and enterprise architecture fields. I'm also a book author, which you can see on the screen right now. This book is a great reading material about engineering excellence, software architecture and leadership best practices. Today we are speaking about processes and career of a software architect, and specifically what do software architects do in large enterprises and companies. And obviously we will answer the question, what is the day-to-day responsibility of software architects in such environments? But the second question I want to answer is, how does the future look, or where are the improvement opportunities? Let's get started. I'm recording this video because I want to add some clarity about what is expecting you on your career path as you move upward on the staircase. But as opposed to focusing on that path from bottom up, I will be describing things from top to bottom because that's what makes more sense from the enterprise or the company standpoint. Oh, and by the way, top doesn't mean better or bottom doesn't mean worse. This is just how companies are structured, literally. So, top of the company, what do we got there? We have C-suites and executives. And what kind of decisions do they make on a daily basis? They are making decisions about buy versus build. For instance, if they're building a portfolio, which part of the portfolio they are going to utilize off the shelf and which one they are going to build within the company. Other kinds of decisions they are making is about market analysis and competition, as well as time and road to market. And from the architecture standpoint, most relevant role here is enterprise architecture. It's not that enterprise architect is helping them make these decisions, although sometimes they can in small companies, but in large enterprises, usually these C-suite executive decisions and directions are the input to the enterprise architecture. And so from our primary question standpoint, of course, this is part of the daily responsibilities for the enterprise architect to know the decisions and directions from the C-suite and incorporate it into the enterprise architecture discipline. And when we move to the next level, which is the higher level management, as I call them, but you could call them anything else, for instance, vice presidents and senior vice presidents, and sometimes directors and senior directors. And these people are making decisions about the portfolio implementation as such, not necessarily the composition of portfolio, but the implementation. And those directions which I mentioned earlier, for instance, buy versus build, at this level come into picture in terms of vendor management, for instance, for the buy decision. Because if you are buying an off-the-shelf solution, of course you need to manage the vendor and relationship with them, the pricing negotiation and so on and so forth. Also on the buy side of things are the technology management. For instance, if you are going to utilize a cloud, you need to understand that the cloud and the technologies that come with it become part of your portfolio composition from the technology domain standpoint. It's about the build direction of things. You are looking at decisions such as how to compose teams, how to compose solutions, and the resource and budget allocation and so on. And of course, we need an enterprise architect here because typically enterprise architecture covers all these domains. For instance, my favorite, the TOGAF framework, covers these domains via business, data, application, and technology domains respectively. And thus, on this high level, you will be all covered if you have the enterprise architect involved in such decision-making process. And of course, that means that the enterprise architect roles and responsibilities include to be involved in discussions and decision-making processes at this level of the enterprise. But the enterprise architect alone cannot handle all those various domains that I mentioned. So typically in the enterprises, you have a representative from each domain. For instance, I mentioned 4 domains, as you remember, which was business, data, application, and technology. For data, we often have data architects or enterprise data architects. And for the application, we have solution architects. Similarly, for other areas, I've seen people who hold the titles of that domain's architect, for instance, business architects or technology architects, and they all support the function of the enterprise architecture overall. So as such, in this area, you can imagine involvement of the enterprise architecture on all specific domain representatives, and it becomes part of their roles and responsibilities. In the modern solution architecture world, people must be focused on the microservices architecture, event-driven architecture, how to split the portfolio solutions properly, where to draw the lines, and how to integrate them so that the data which comes from the data architecture domain is properly transferred from solution to another solution and integrated and transformed as necessary. As about the current prevalent gap in this industry, it's about confusion between the solution architecture and enterprise architecture. From my experience, I have seen a lot of times people expecting solution architects to do the enterprise architect's job and the other way around as well. There is also confusion from the practitioner standpoint. A lot of solution architects do the enterprise architect's job, and unfortunately, a lot of enterprise architects deliver the solution architecture, which has diminishing results, of course. So my advice to solution architects: know where your role is and focus on microservices, event-driven architectures, and building the technical solutions that support the business, which actually brings us to the second gap in this work stream. And this is about inability to support the enterprise architecture decisions. So imagine this situation, which is very common. Enterprise architects understand more or less business, understand how the business and technology need to support each other. And then comes the solution architecture into the picture. And what happens? Solution architects don't necessarily understand or are able to follow the enterprise architect's directions. And what that means is there is a gap or a silo between the two roles, and the solution architecture goes completely different direction than the enterprise architect intended to do. And of course, the cost of this problem is increased maintainability for the solution architecture and the inability to support the business as such. So this should have clarified what the solution architect should be doing on daily basis. And finally, we reach the software engineering team level, and the engineering teams are responsible to decide how to implement certain applications under the solution. They're responsible to make decisions such as which frameworks they will be using, which programming language, if there is such choice under the solution architecture decisions. And then they utilize these decisions to build one or sometimes a few applications. Of course, within the teams we have application architects. Sometimes they are part of the team, sometimes they support a team or several teams, but it is the application architect that works with the engineering teams while building those applications. And the common gaps that I have noticed, unfortunately, is again the same that I mentioned earlier within the solution architecture area, and this is informing back the solution and enterprise architecture about made decisions. For instance, if you are making a decision that your application will run on a cloud, of course the solution and enterprise architecture need to be informed about this decision, because they need to incorporate that technology into their portfolio composition. But unfortunately, this flow of information does not necessarily exist in large enterprises, and there is a risk of another silo. So I think I was able to clarify the roles and the responsibilities of all three roles of the architect, which is enterprise architect, then solution architect, and then finally the application architect. And I also think that you might be able to guess the answer to the second question of the day, which is how does the future look? I've been speaking about these problems and these silos and the gaps between the different work streams. And so what I recommend is to bridge those gaps. In other words, when you make decisions in the application architecture area, you need to inform the solution architecture. There must be some kind of partnership between the two disciplines. And similarly, when we are making some decisions on the solution architecture, you must be informing the enterprise architecture, because again, it impacts what the enterprise architecture manages and governs, and to make the best informed decisions, the entire information must be integrated together. You might be thinking that everything that I described is an idealistic world, and in real world things don't look that way. Maybe in the real world things are not as organized as what I described earlier, but maybe that is why there are problems with most of the companies. There are problems and unnecessary complexity involved in all kinds of solutions that the companies deliver. So to make the company successful, you need to build efficient processes and solutions, and for that you need to clearly understand the roles and responsibilities of the architecture. And if you're an engineer, you need to prepare yourself for one of these roles respectively and clearly understand your responsibilities. Otherwise, you might not be able to do your job so well, and then the entire company's outcomes will be diminished. And this kind of knowledge is exactly what I'm trying to provide with my videos, with my blog, link to which is in the description, and with my book, which is about engineering excellence, software architecture, and the leadership best practices in the enterprise. If this video was somewhat helpful, please click thumbs up button so that others can also find it, and also subscribe to my channel and you will receive notifications for the future episodes. If you have any questions about this topic, please leave your comment in the below section. My name is Tengiz. I'm your host for the Software Architecture Vlog series. Thank you.